the committee, folks, for state government finance. Representative Green, you want to move the minutes for February 22nd?
Yeah, Madam Chair, I'll move the minutes for the 22nd.
With enthusiasm, Representative Green moves the minutes for February 22nd. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed? The minutes are adopted. Today we have Representative Dettmer. He's going to start us off with House File 505. Representative Dettmer, we're going to lay this bill over for possible inclusion in the omnibus state government finance bill. Do you have any amendments, Representative Dettmer?
Let's see.
I'll give you a moment to get settled. It is.
Madam Chair, committee members, particularly, I think we have the A170070.
Representative Dettmer moves the A17 amendment. To your amendment, Representative Dettmer.
Just kind of technical language here. We wanted to get it in the way we want it.
Okay. With that, all those in favor of the A17 amendment, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed, the amendment is adopted. We will take testimony after Representative Dettmer has made his comments. Representative Dettmer, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just some brief comments here because we have some good testimony here on House File 505. But as the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan wind down, I hope they're winding down anyway. I have a son that just landed in Afghanistan 2 weeks ago. The majority of our new generation of veterans are returning home stronger and wiser from their service, becoming immediately assets to our communities. And I think Minnesota in the last few years is doing a great job welcoming back our troops after they've been over in combat. Many others, however, are bringing their wars home and silent suffering from invisible injuries. And Madam Chair and members, what House File 505 is going to do, we're asking for some funding which appropriates $350,000 in 2018 and $350,000 in 2019 to the Department of Veterans Affairs for a grant. And our speakers here today, it provides $700,000 grants for 2 years of the Veterans Defense Project. If you've been following the news, this organization has done a lot for our veterans. And the Veterans Defense Project is a Minnesota-based nonprofit for focusing on defending veterans in court. So with that, I'd like to have my testifiers say a few words.
Welcome to the committee. If you can please state your name for the record and who you represent.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Members of the committee, my name is Brock Hunter. I'm a Minneapolis-based attorney. I'm also a military veteran, and I devote a substantial portion of my legal practice to representing veterans in the criminal justice system. I'm here today in my capacity as co-founder and president of the Veterans Defense Project, a Minnesota-based nonprofit organization dedicated to advocating and educating on behalf of veterans caught up in the criminal justice system. My work in this area began with my own military service on the Korean demilitarized zone in the late 1980s. During the waning years of the Cold War, at a time of very high tensions on the Korean Peninsula. As a scout in the reconnaissance squadron of the Army 2nd Infantry Division, we were at the tip of the spear, facing certain death in the event the Cold War went hot on the peninsula. Several times during my deployment there, it nearly did, and my buddies and I repeatedly accepted our own deaths. And though the hot war never came and we never saw combat, fortunately, that experience of being ready to fight and die on a moment's notice had an impact on us that followed us into our civilian lives. Within weeks of participating in the live reconnaissance missions inside the DMZ and ready to fight and die at a moment's notice, I was starting as a freshman in college. My transition was not seamless, unfortunately. I was spun up and restless and gravitated towards a wild crowd, and I did some stupid stuff that could have landed me in a lot of trouble. Fortunately, I made it through that transition period without permanent marks on my record. I went on to graduate at the top of my class in college and from the University of Minnesota Law School in the late 1990s. After graduation, I worked as a public defender in the Minnesota courts, and I quickly noticed how many Vietnam vets we had coming through the system. Many of them, I learned, had been cycling regularly through the system ever since they had come home. In fact, I went on to learn that a third of Vietnam veterans, more than 1 million, suffered long-term psychiatric issues related to their service. And half of those diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder by the VA in the 1980s had had some contact with the criminal justice system. The Department of Justice studies confirmed that Vietnam veterans on the whole had been treated more harshly in the American criminal courts after the war than non-veterans who'd committed the same crimes. And even as of the late 1990s, the DOJ documented hundreds of thousands of Vietnam veterans still incarcerated across the country. On September 11, 2001, our nation was attacked and we went to war again. And now, more than 15 years later, we continue to fight these two longest wars in our country's history simultaneously with a small, all-volunteer military force. Without the draft we relied on in past wars to spread the burden of fighting over many more shoulders, many Iraq and Afghan veterans are carrying an unprecedented load. Whereas the vast majority of Vietnam vets served one 12-month tour in combat, many Iraq and Afghan vets have served multiple deployments, something that is unprecedented in our country's history. The majority of our new generation of veterans returning home are stronger and wiser for their service, becoming immediate assets to their communities. But others, unfortunately, are bringing their wars home with them in the form of invisible injuries that get them into trouble. Staff Sergeant Marko Milosevic, who you'll hear from here momentarily, is a former Army Ranger and Special Operator who served 12 combat deployments in Iraq and Afghanistan with the Joint Special Operations Command, or JSOC. You will hear his own story of service, sacrifice, and later involvement in the justice system, as well as the second chance he was given to become an asset and not a liability in his community. As Sergeant Milosevic will confirm, he and others, many others psychologically injured veterans are returning undiagnosed and untreated and acting out in reckless, self-destructive, and sometimes violent ways, victimizing the very communities and individuals they were once willing to sacrifice their lives to protect. It is often only when we encounter a veteran in the back of a squad car or at the county jail that we identify someone in need of help. Over the years, my practice has become focused on helping these veterans take responsibility for themselves, obtain the needed treatment, and while fighting on their behalf in the courts to map out a path for redemption. Frustrated with the often blind eye the justice system turns towards the plight of veterans, in 2008, I helped draft and pass Minnesota's pioneering veteran sentencing statute, which made us one of the first states in the country to mandate that courts take into account an offender's military service and resulting trauma in crafting an appropriate sentence, recognizing that very frequently probation and treatment is better than incarceration. In getting the veteran help, and here in Minnesota have been drafted on a national level to help pass legislation in other states and to help set up and grow veterans courts all across the country. We've also had a part in establishing the handful of veterans courts that we have here in Minnesota and training judges, prosecutors, and defense attorneys across our state to do a better job with veterans. Along the way, I joined forces with some amazing other veterans, and we together formed the Veterans Defense Project and then published the legal treatise Defending Veterans in Criminal Court, the only one of its kind in the country. In some ways, we've been victims of our own success. Through these public education efforts, we inadvertently thrust a lightning rod up into a growing storm, and we are now contacted on an increasing basis by courts across Minnesota and around the country seeking assistance in educating their personnel and doing a better job with the veterans coming through their system. Well, Minnesota started out at the head of the pack with our pioneering veteran sentencing statute. We've unfortunately fallen behind the trends on the national level in recent years. Well, we have a handful of veterans courts here in Minnesota. Other states now, some of them have dozens of veterans courts, and many are vying to become the first that has some form of a veterans court in every jurisdiction in their state. The funding that we're seeking here would help us put Minnesota back at the front of the pack, to help us educate all of the justice professionals in Minnesota, every district court, to help them understand the problems that they're going to be dealing with veterans, to understand how our veteran sentencing statute can help them effectively deal with it, and how they can efficiently and effectively tap into the federal resources, particularly within the Veterans Administration, to make sure that we are doing a better job this time around with this generation of veterans coming home. With that, I'll turn over the floor to Mr. Milosevic.
And thank you, Mr. Hunter. I'm just going to pause here for a moment. Members, the new version of House File 505.
Yeah, thank you, committee members. Like I said before, my name is Marko Milosevic, and I'm basically here to put a face to the veteran that Brock is referring to. I'm going to start with a brief background of me and my military career. I joined the Army in April of 2001. I was just going to do my 4 years and get my college money and get out. I was in airborne school when 9/11 happened, and after that, I joined the United States Army Rangers, the 75th Ranger Regiment. Upon completion of the Ranger Indoctrination Program, I was assigned to 2nd Battalion, 75th Ranger Regiment at Fort Lewis, Washington. As Brock alluded to before, I did 12 combat deployments between Afghanistan and Iraq for a total of 4.5 years. When I wasn't in combat, I was training to go to combat. That was the bulk of my career. I joined at 17, and I got out of the Army when I was 31. And between each deployment, it became harder and harder and harder to come home and fit back in with society. When I got out of the military at the age of 31, I basically existed in a world that was all black and white, being in the military. And I had one tool in my toolbox to solve problems, and that tool was violence. Now all of a sudden I'm out. I got a handshake and an American flag and an attaboy from the United States Army. And I was sent on my way, and I was pretty disillusioned, pretty broken. I started drinking more than I should have, and I was coping with some issues that I didn't even know I had, frankly. After those deployments, I wound up moving back home to Beltrami County, where my drinking landed me in direct contact with law enforcement, and I was charged with a 3rd-degree felony assault, and I was sitting there in jail, wondering what got me there, frankly, and I realized that I was way better than this. This isn't who I am, and it's time to turn my life around. That's when I came into contact with Brock Hunter, and the first time I say I'd met Brock, I had a pretty big chip on my shoulder, and I was not the easiest person to get along with right off the bat. I had what Brock refers to and what I've come to refer to as the Superman syndrome. I had gone through all this stuff in the United States military to hone my skills, completing some of the most difficult training that the military had to offer, checking almost every box of what you can do in the Army. And with the Superman syndrome, you don't really reach out for help. You think you can handle it all on your own because after all that time in the military, you become pretty self-reliant, especially when you're doing some of the stuff I did towards the end of my career, out on my own, basically in Kabul, wearing civilian clothes and doing a lot of various things that were, you know, kind of under the radar, if you will. After I was charged, that's when I met Brock. I checked myself into the inpatient program at the St. Cloud VA. It's called the RRTP program. It was a 30 to 45-day program in which I got sober, figured out a plan for my life, and then proceeded to go through the process of the court. Judge Benchoof up in Beltrami County saw something in me, gave me a second chance, gave me a stay of adjudication, and I worked really hard to change my life. Currently now, as a result of me getting a second chance, I have enrolled in Bemidji State University, currently at Metro State, finishing my undergraduate, and I start some summer and law classes this summer. I intend on going to St. Thomas. I have a 4.0 GPA, and I've really dedicated myself to being a veterans advocate and helping other veterans in crisis. As a matter of fact, this weekend, a guy I served with called me up out of the blue who is having a lot of the same difficulties I was having. We were able to get hands on him and get him into the St. Cloud VA for some treatment, and looking at getting that guy the same second chance. We know, Brock cited some statistics earlier, and I'd like to briefly touch on a few. We know that with the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, they've been going on for almost 15 years now, the longest running wars that our country's ever faced. And we know that upwards of almost 80% of veterans coming back home from the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq will struggle with alcoholism, drug abuse, or run-ins with the law in some form or another. And these veterans courts, or I like to call them intervention opportunities, are a great way to intervene with the veteran and get them the help they need, because we know a lot of these offenses are directly related to combat trauma. We also know that if we throw the book at veterans and incarcerate them, put them in jail, and don't get them the help we need, the recidivism rate is far higher than that of the average everyday citizen that gets convicted of a crime. And I ask judges and I ask sheriffs all the time. As a matter of fact, we were up meeting with the Beltrami County sheriff and the chief prosecutor up there, and we're working on getting a veterans court set up in Beltrami County. I ask them all the time if they've ever thanked a veteran for their service, and they always say yes, of course. And I tell them, then here's the chance we can really thank them for their service and give them a second chance that they deserve since they fought for this country. And with that, I'll yield my time to Pete Orpett. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Orpett?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm Pete Orpett. I'm the Washington County Attorney. I'm here on behalf of the bill that Representative Dettmer put in. And I speak as a prosecutor, but I also have some personal involvement in this, too. I did serve in the Marine Corps active duty, followed by several years in the U.S. Army Reserve, but that's not why I'm here. Why I'm here is I saw in the mid-2000s a number of people coming through court when I was in Hennepin County, and the only thing they all had in common was they had no prior offenses whatsoever until I get them, and it turned out they'd all come out of the service, and I was getting flooded with them, and I thought there has to be another way. I learned about the first Veterans Court in Buffalo, New York. I teamed up with Brock Hunter and a number of others. We got one in Hennepin. Then I relied again on Brock to help me set up a program in my own county, Washington County, and his advocacy was instrumental in getting it. And that's 72 people I've put through my program in the last few years, none of whom I've seen again, except socially. And I viewed it as doing the right thing to the right person at the right time. These folks that come to me, they weren't a criminal. They haven't demonstrated that. And I never would have seen them but for the one thing they all had in common: multiple tours, coming back, and not having the support. So I think they've done marvelous work. I would recommend that Mr. Hunter change the name from Defending Veterans to Helping Them, because the collaborative model that Brock brought, and I've worked with him on, really has shown success, and I applaud Staff Sergeant Milosevic. In fact, I'm trying to help them get a veterans court in Beltrami, too. My only problem is I've asked Brock for so many times to help. I can't keep asking him to do it on his own nickel, so I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Orpett. I'm glad you raised the issue of prior offenses, because I was curious, you know, if people had prior offenses. Would you say, I don't know who wants to answer this, would you say that most, if not all, have never had a prior offense, or can you kind of give me some statistics about that at all?
Madam Chair, I can answer that. I work with recruiters quite frequently in my own county. To get in the military, even a DWI, in most cases, will keep you out.
Okay.
So other than de minimis traffic offenses, young people can't get in. And by the way, I would mention, too, I've had 2 women in my veterans court. While they weren't combat vets, they were victims of military sexual trauma, which essentially has the same acting out that comes with it. But everyone that I know that went in can't have any priors.
Mr. Hunter, anything to add?
Yeah, Madam Chair, I agree with Mr. Orpett's characterization. Nobody these days is getting into the military with any kind of serious prior criminal record. We do sometimes, though, find veterans who are surfacing and coming up on our radar who have had some prior offenses since their return home that weren't properly addressed and dealt with within the criminal court system. And so our intervention with them is occurring maybe after they've had a couple of convictions. My case that I make to the courts and to the prosecutors is, whether they've acted out before or not, this is our intervention opportunity now to get them in, to get the proper help that they need, hold them accountable all along the way, but give them a path to redemption, a path to get back on their feet heading forward, because so many of these folks, even those who've come home and struggled quite a bit, I think have the opportunity to be significant assets to their communities and to harness this amazing wealth of wisdom and experience that they've had in relatively young lives to put it to work here in our communities rather than being ongoing liabilities that unfortunately we saw so many Vietnam veterans become when they didn't get the help they needed when they came home, and then just cycling through the system over and over and over again. We can do a better job with this generation of veterans, and I think we really have to.
Right.
If I could just add real quickly, Madam Chair.
Mr. Orr.
During the Vietnam conflict, there were a number of people, in fact, I served with them, who were given an alternative by the court saying you can either go in the Marine Corps or you can go to prison. And that we'd call that 4 in the Corps or 10 in the pen. And, but that stopped. Several years ago, that stopped. So I can assure you now today that, although I do get recruiters that say, this kid was all ready to go, but he got a reckless driving or something. I get those worked out as long as I can make sure that kid gets on a plane. I think they're in great hands by then. Thank you.
Is there anybody else that wishes to testify to this bill?
One addendum, Madam Chair, if I may add one
Mr.
more
Hunter.
point, and Representative Dettmer asked me to address this specifically. What we envision this money being used for specifically, as we understand it, we're not allowed to use this money for direct representation of veterans, but rather what we want to do is set up a formal, organized training program for all of the jurisdictions across Minnesota. We've gotten our message out to many of them, again, as Mr. Orpid indicated, on our own dime, just going out whenever anybody asks. But we still have only been in front of a smaller fraction of all of the jurisdiction in Minnesota. And even those who have heard our message have heard essentially just the synopsis of it. We are traveling the country regularly doing more intensive training programs for jurisdictions, and we can bring that here home to Minnesota. We can train up all of the judges, prosecutors, public defenders, probation officers in the state with this grant to ensure that everybody is on the same page. We would like to see a formal, organized, all bells and whistles veterans court in every jurisdiction in Minnesota. But in the meantime, there's a lot that we can do to train the stakeholders in each of these jurisdictions to use the resources they have available to them to do a better job with the veterans coming through their system. Train them how to identify veterans in need of help, how to guide them to the VA for treatment, and how to communicate effectively with the VA to ensure that they are getting all that they need through the VA. It is really information that is most vital to get out to them. The funding, we hope, will follow in other forms, but right now we just simply need to educate folks. Mr. Milosevic also just noted another thing I wanted to address, and that is our sister organization, the Minnesota Assistance Council for Veterans. Minnesota is very lucky to have this nonprofit organization here in Minnesota that also provides some legal assistance to veterans. And I would just note that our missions do not bump against each other. They, in fact, dovetail. MACV's mission is to assist veterans in finding civil legal services. Ours is on the criminal side. We have volunteered the Veterans Defense Project at the veteran stand-down events that MACV puts on across the state to help set up the criminal court aspect of the stand-down and make sure that they have that component there. So the funding that we're seeking is not contradictory to the MACV, the funding that MACV is seeking from the state, and in fact, our missions coincide very well.
Okay. Is there anybody else that wishes to testify to this bill? Okay. I've got Representative Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Representative Dettmer. Very good bill. A couple questions. I'm curious, why did we remove the legal assistance language from the bill? Why, since that's, looking at your website, that seems like what you mainly do, why would we not have you represent?
Well, as I understand it,
Mr.
that's just
Hunter.
simply, I'm sorry, Madam Chair, Representative Johnson, our understanding is that Minnesota law does not allow us under this type of funding to do direct legal assistance. My law firm, private law firm, we represent veterans in criminal court as a separate mission. The Veterans Defense Project's mission is the education and advocacy piece. And what we want to do with this money is not go out and represent veterans on Minnesota's dime. That is a separate thing that we're doing. What we want to use this funding for is to go out and empower all of the public defenders that work on a daily basis with veterans in the Minnesota system to make sure that they are effectively representing the veterans that they come into contact with them, as well as the private criminal defense bar, prosecutors, judges, everybody else in the system to educate them and empower them to do what needs to be done.
Representative Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And are there protections in place then just to ensure that the money is spent in Minnesota? And can you
Yes.
say a little bit about that?
Mr.
Yes,
Hunter.
the way that this, I'm sorry, Madam Chair, Representative Johnson, this money would be overseen by the Minnesota Department of Veterans Affairs. And this will be used entirely and exclusively for training of the Minnesota court system. This is not going to go towards helping set up programming in other states. We are working on funding from the American Bar Association to help us accomplish that more nationwide mission. But that funding is something that is going to be a long time in coming if it does come. And in the meantime, we want to focus our efforts here on the home front here in Minnesota and make sure that we get Minnesota up to speed on this level. And as I said, put us back at the forefront that we were at just a few years ago on making sure that we're doing more for veterans in the justice system here in Minnesota than any other state.
Representative Johnson.
And thank you, Madam Chair. My only last comment, I guess, is it's an excellent program, so I hope you ask for what you need. If, I worry if this is sufficient funding for the needs that are out there. So if the need is bigger, I hope you're clear on what it is you're requesting.
Madam Chair and Representative
Mr.
Johnson,
Hunter.
we will do the very best with the money that we're given, and we'll make sure that it goes as far as it can go.
Thank you. Representative Nash.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Representative Dettmer, thanks for bringing this bill. I had the good fortune of having Sergeant Milosevic and Mr. Hunter in my office, and we talked for a while, and I was very impressed. 12 deployments is a lot, and just thrilled that you're here today telling people your story. You made a huge investment in our country, and I'm very supportive of us making this investment in veterans for the state of Minnesota. The question I guess I have is, with the $350,000 that you're able to utilize to get this up and running, cost avoidance of other things down the line, what do you think that might be? Is there a way to quantify that to prevent some things going into the court systems that might cost the state even more in the long run? Is that a metric that you've looked at?
I guess I'm not,
Hunter.
I'm sorry, Madam Chair, Representative Nash, I guess I'm not sure when you say cost avoidance exactly what you're asking
In
about.
keeping, Madam Chair,
Representative Nash.
Madam Chair, thank you. In keeping veterans out of courts that really are not kind of educated or attuned to what your goal is, you're going to obviously encumber them with costs. In order to accelerate this type of court and this type of action, do you think that it's going to be able to reduce the cost to other courts that we've got?
Mr. Hunter.
And if the answer is no, Madam Chair, that's fine if you haven't looked at that.
Madam Chair, Representative Nash, that's not something we've looked specifically at. Again, we just want to get everybody up to speed on understanding the issues, the fact that we have veterans flooding into the system now, and history indicates that that is going to just continue to escalate as these wars drag on and more veterans are coming home. I think that there's more that can be done to assist veterans before they get into trouble with the justice system, and I think that's what you're addressing. But that would be outside of the parameters of this bill and this particular mission.
Representative Nash.
And Madam Chair, just wanted to have the record note that Representative Johnson and I agree that if you need to ask for more, please do. That's a rarity, I'm sure. But again, I think you made a huge investment in our country, and I want to make sure that, my point was, I think that in making this investment, we're going to not put folks into the court system unfairly, or that really, have no business in being there if we can pursue programs like you've described, and that in the long run, it's going to make it a better system. And I think Sergeant Milosevic had a...
Madam Chair, may I
Mr.
make a
Orpik?
comment to Representative Nash? I think I understand what you're saying, Representative. In Washington County, we've diverted these veterans from the criminal courtroom into another kind of courtroom, and invariably, somebody's going to get stuck with the costs of fixing these people, if you will. In other words, chemical dependency treatment, therapy, lots of group work. And the VA has been there in my county to pick up all the costs. It isn't to say it's free, it's to say it isn't coming out of the state pocket necessarily.
Right.
And so I've seen some great cost reductions in my county by catching these men and women and diverting them out of the criminal justice system and getting them the help they need.
Mr. Hunter.
Madam Chair and Representative Nash, and I would follow on with what Mr. Orpett said. Forever, the VA has existed as a completely separate silo from the state criminal court system. And in recent years, the VA has really accelerated what it has to offer to veterans. There are new treatment programs emerging for combat trauma that are more effective than ever before. There's a wealth of resources available to veterans that, unfortunately, because of the Superman syndrome that Mr. Milosevic described, they're not often going and getting on their own. And so it is often the criminal court contact that serves as that intervention opportunity to get them plugged into the VA system. And part of our educational efforts is to educate the state criminal courts as to what the VA has to offer and how best to access it. This is a win-win for everybody because the state now can tap into what is a very large federal VA budget and continuing to grow and utilize it to help our state's veterans much more effectively than we're currently doing.
Representative Nash?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. And Mr. Orpett, you articulated what I was trying to get at, which is the diversion, I guess, away from our state court systems. I appreciate that, and that was the point I'm trying to make. Again, thank you all for being here.
Well, and
Thank
I
you,
see
Madam.
Mr. Johnson here. I'd like him to come up to the table, if you would, please. Mr. Johnson, I'm just curious, why is it this not something that we do already, you know, kind of removing the silo between Veterans Affairs and our judicial system to provide this training? And, I mean, why is this not part of the mission already, I guess, is what I'm going to ask you.
Representative Anderson, members of the committee, my name is Ben Johnson. I'm the Legislative Director for the Minnesota Department of Veterans Affairs. To your question, this sort of initiative is one that we support. The idea that there are veterans in the criminal justice system who are not being adequately served is of concern to us, and veterans courts as a system is something that we've looked at in the past in trying to improve our ability to support them. With regards to why our agency isn't currently doing this, we reach out to our partners in the County Veteran Service Office organization throughout the counties, but we don't do direct representation. And legal support services is something that we work with. For instance, the Minnesota Assistance Council for Veterans, MACV, is a recipient of a pass-through grant, and they do some work on behalf of veterans. They're free clinics. They have judges that will show up on premises for these stand-downs and actually provide services. So it is something that we're working on with our partners in the veterans community.
Well, I guess my question, though, as I view the $700,000 that we're looking at for over the biennium, this is for education and outreach to the judiciary system. So these are the county attorneys, the judges that are seeing these veterans coming before them. So as I understand the bill, this is educating them, and so it's not providing legal assistance to veterans. Instead, it's basically removing the silo between government and saying, this is what we need to do to make sure that we're not incarcerating people that could just need an intervention moment, basically. So I'm just curious, why is it, I mean, I don't see that as VA providing legal representation. Instead, what you're doing is educating folks in another side of government to address the issues. So can you tell me why?
Yeah, Chair Anderson, so your understanding is similar to mine, although I understand it not to be limited specifically to judges, prosecutors, or public defenders, but parole officers, private attorneys working in defense of veterans in the criminal justice system. I guess I would say that the idea of educating the courts on specific issues that veterans face is a challenge in and of itself, and without folks like Mr. Hunter and his team, getting access to the individuals through the Bar Association, through the court system, through the judicial branch at the state level is something that we're working to address, but it hasn't been yet. And really it's, I guess, outside the box thinking, and how do we make sure that these individuals are speaking the language and understand the challenges that veterans face. I mean, one area of concern obviously is that educating for-profit attorneys in the vernacular and the ways that veterans speak, we are concerned long-term that that it bleeds beyond the criminal justice aspect and bleeds into other areas of representation that currently are being addressed by quite competently by our CVSOs, MDVA, and that sort of thing. So that is one area of concern. But in reality, this is the first bill we've seen where it's specific funding for a nonprofit that's going to help address some of these places where these two sides, where the silo, as it's been described, aren't being addressed, haven't been clearly defined, and we view this as an opportunity for this nonprofit to really break down some of those barriers and better communicate with folks who make decisions about what happens to veterans facing criminal issues.
Well, Mr. Johnson, I'd be curious to kind of see what steps the VA has taken in communicating with public safety, in communicating with the judicial system. So if you can maybe provide that detail, because I see this as something as that should be part of your mission. I would have assumed that this was taking place anyway. But that being said, we've got 3 other members on the list that have questions. Representative Driscoll.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I will make this brief. Mr. Milosevic, you may or may not remember me from earlier this session. I certainly remember you, sir. When you were in the Veterans Committee, I talked to you about de-escalation training. And I took your story yesterday, sitting right where you gentlemen are today, to our Public Safety and Security Commission, which would have jurisdiction over that de-escalation training. Share your parts of your story and parts of the individual who you said would benefit from that de-escalation training. And I just wanted to, since I had the opportunity to see you today, to thank you for that story and let you know that the committee unanimously, well, they laid it over, but there was a lot of positive comments on that, and Representative Ward was a member of that committee as well. So I just thought I would share that with you, that your efforts are making a difference down here.
Mr. Milosevic.
Madam Chair and Representative Driscoll, I appreciate that. And like I said before in the last committee meeting we were at, if at any time you want to link up and we can discuss in further how I can help that cause, I'd be honored, because that de-escalation training is absolutely necessary. And I know a few other veterans who are alive today because of de-escalation training with law enforcement and having contact with veterans.
Okay. Representative Pugh.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Chair Dettmer, for bringing this bill. It's just really fantastic. I really especially want to thank the Sergeant for being here and putting a face on this tremendous opportunity that we have to provide services to those of you who served us. We're so grateful. My question is maybe for, I'd like to hear what Mr. Orput might have to say. Wondering, to what degree the resources that the committee might provide could be used to expand the Veterans Court. I had the privilege of serving on the Veterans Committee last biennium and attending a number of Veterans Court as a ride-along. And it was such a productive, wonderful use of the state's resources. And, you know, I haven't been to your court, but I see some tremendous opportunities here potentially with these resources to expand veterans courts in Minnesota.
Mr. Orput.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Representative, thank you for that question. I believe there's 7 veterans courts right now, but there's some iterations such as mine, which I wouldn't call a formal court necessarily, more of like a diversion program. And that's the start in many places. And that was probably as good as it was going to get when everybody talks about finite resources. My position is if you folks allow us to train so that you know what to look for, you'll better be able to know how many veterans have even come through your court. And then the other part is you don't have to have a full-on standalone veterans court. I wish I did, and I may, but at least do something. Use your diversion power. Try to screen these and make sure you get the right folks. And that's been moving pretty significantly. I know Carver County, I'm hoping Beltrami we get one. A number of my colleagues in Anoka County set one up. So even small counties can do it. Down in the Mankato area, they have that too. So what I'm hoping for is with Mr. Hunter and the other folks in the Veterans Defense Project, they can at least educate them. At a minimum, you should consider some type of program that gets these people the help they need. And if you get enough of them, that may allow us to actually move to get a formal veterans court. I think another alternative is to make it substance abuse courts for veterans, mentally ill, drug-dependent people, and alcoholics. That's another option that I think could be explored once people get the education that I think they need to hear to understand the problem. Thank you.
Representative Pugh.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I would like to hear from Mr. Hunter as well. But obviously, these resources would be 100% targeted to our veterans. So anxious to hear, to what degree we can really maximize, leverage the great programs that we have going with the veterans courts or the diversion programs. I'm unclear if the diversion program in Washington County is one of the official 7 veterans courts. If one of you could clarify that as well, I would appreciate it.
Madam Chair, Representative, it's not. That I can answer.
Mr. Hunter.
Madam Chair, Representative Pugh, in an ideal world, the legislature would appropriate additional funds to allow a full-blown, all bells and whistles veterans court in every jurisdiction in Minnesota. That's my personal dream. I would like to see Minnesota be the first state in the country to have that. In the meantime, though, as Mr. Orpett stated, much can be done to educate stakeholders in all the courts in Minnesota to use the resources that they currently have available most efficiently and effectively to engage with the federal VA system and to maximize all the resources they have to offer. But specialty courts in general, I think, represent a big part of the future of the criminal justice system, whether it's drug courts, mental health courts, or veterans courts. And I'm a big believer in all of them. And yes, as the Finance Committee looks at any requests for additional funding for veterans courts, I would ask you to give as much as you possibly can.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Representative Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And, I want to make sure this bill moves smoothly through the legislative body here. One question I would have, since we're talking about military veterans who are involved with criminal justice, and we're talking about training in the courts and maybe probation, parole, I'm wondering if it needs to have a stop in public safety, and if it does, that we consider that so it doesn't get, messed up later on down the line. But I'll defer to your judgment on that, Madam Chair.
I've been thinking the same thing, Representative Johnson, so I think we're laying it over for now, and we can always bring it up later on. So, Representative Ward.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I would like to thank Representative Dettmer and the testifiers for sharing your stories. I just wanted to comment that what I think you're actually doing is better than just wholesale establishing courts all across the state, because you're talking about establishing relationships and doing some training so that people are aware. I've worked with County Attorney Orpett for a while, and so I know his perspective. We share a perspective on restorative justice and restoring people to the community, making them whole and giving them a chance. And it takes a while for people to understand that when we talk about public safety training, we talk about all of these, a simple example is teachers having a better understanding of dyslexia so that they can, because they come to class with this set of tools, and we need to help them understand that they need a different tool to deal with children with dyslexia. And I think we need to help people understand that they need some different tools sometimes. If the court system is set up, public safety is set up to be about punishment, then we end up with people in prison, and our Department of Corrections isn't funded well enough to meet all of the needs of the people that we're sending to prison. We're not funding them well enough to do the treatment that a lot of people need. So if we can interrupt this cycle, I just think that you're doing the right thing at the right time, and I look forward in 2 years to you coming back and telling us how this worked and then going the next step. Because otherwise it feels like we would be, if we had all the money and we could just set up the courts, we would be mandating it. And I think a better approach is the relationship building. So thank you for what you're doing.
And so before I give Representative Dettmer the last word, we don't have any more questions from members. What I would be interested in is getting an itemization, basically, of how you arrived at the number for the 700,000 over the biennium. So what actually are the dollars going to go for? I imagine that you've probably did that in order to figure out what the amount would be. So if you can send that, I'd like to be able to share it with the committee as a whole, and then we'll be able to take a look at that. So. And with that, Representative Dettmer, any closing comments?
Well, Madam Chair and committee members, I think you know, well, if you're new to the legislature, you probably don't know my background, but I think you're figuring out that I have a heart for veterans, a 25-year veteran myself, and our twin sons with each 4 deployments, not 12 deployments. I just can't imagine that, but you do have a family too, and those family members, they have to maintain the home front when people are gone. And I really believe that this is something that we can do to train the people who work in the court system, the lawyers and the different people. And if you have never been to a Veterans Court, I encourage you to check with your county and go and visit. You can go and visit, sit in on what they're doing there. I've done that, and it's amazing when that young man or young woman walks in front of the judge, and they're standing there basically at attention, and the judge is asking them how they're doing. Are you following what we set up for you, and so forth, and that communication is going on between the judge and the veteran. That's something that's really, really neat to see. So, Madam Chair, I really appreciate you allowing us to hear it, and I think everybody here has a heart. I wish every legislator could hear the testimony today to see exactly what this program is all about, and they'll get all the figures for you for the finance part of it. And but I want to thank you, Mr. Chair, or Madam Chair, and also the committee members.
Thank you, and thank you for your testimony. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Members, we're going to move on to House File 691. And this bill is going to be laid over for possible inclusion in the omnibus state government finance bill. And just to kind of walk you through, you do have your House research summary that summarizes it quite well, but what we did in 2011, we established a gain-sharing program that rewards state employees for finding efficiencies within state government. It's a way to recognize the hard work of our state employees, as well as incentivizing folks to find different ways to do government better and provide services to consumers better. And so what this does is it requires MMB to report on a regular basis on the status of this program, and that's basically what the bill does. I'm first going to ask to see if there's anybody that wishes to testify to it, and then we'll go to members' questions. Is there anyone that wishes to testify on House File 691? Welcome to the committee. If you can please state your name for the record and who you represent.
Yes, good afternoon, Madam Chair. My name is Edwin Hudson. I'm the Deputy Commissioner of Human Capital Management at MMB.
And Mr. Hudson, can you speak into the microphone, please?
Sure.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, I would offer up a few comments, perhaps a little background, and then maybe make a few comments, and then I'll be available for any questions you may have. But again, let me start with the background. I will just say that gain sharing is similar to other profit sharing initiatives that have been created in the private sector to incentivize employees to increase productivity, increase efficiencies, and save money in their organizations. Gain sharing incentives are designed to reward employees for factors they can control, such as improved productivity and cost reduction. The Society of Human Resources defined gain sharing as an individual incentivized plan used to enhance productivity by sharing with a group a percentage of the gains the organization realizes from the specific group's effort. Gain sharing is typically paid out as a percentage of an employee's annual salary or a one-time lump sum payment. Some state governments have adopted gain-sharing programs, most of which vary in design from a simple employee suggestion program with a $1,000 cash award to a more elaborate expenditure reduction or increase efficiency program, which can pay up to as much as $50,000. The state of Minnesota executive branch agencies have approached gain sharing through achievement awards. Achievement awards are monetary awards granted to recognize outstanding employee achievement and to be used in situations where financial savings have been realized. In 2012, MMB, in coordination with some of our bargaining units, we developed a policy and issued the policy to create a consistent practice for recognizing outstanding employee performance so that incentives and awards are noticeably linked to employee achievement and performance. This approach was modeled after components of other state government programs. In fiscal year 2014, the executive branch agency provided over 2,600 awards, and the aggregate total value of those awards were just over $2,700,000. In fiscal year 2016, executive branches provided just under 1,900 awards with an aggregate value of $2 million, just over $2 million. Finding operational efficiencies is a part of our everyday work. Under Governor Dayton, we have been directed to create a culture of continuous improvement. Agencies engage in lean events, Kaizen events, results-based accountability activities, and other things. Additionally, all state employees are obligated to be good stewards of taxpayer dollars. House File 691 would clarify the Minnesota Management and Budget must establish a gain-sharing program separate and distinct from existing employee recognition programs and require monthly reporting, implementation, and operations of that program. MMB supports employee recognition programs. MMB also supports the goals of this gain-sharing program, which are to reduce the cost of operating state government and find ways of providing better or more efficient state services. We also believe that employees are uniquely situated to recommend creative ways to achieve these goals. I share these statements with you to indicate MMB's commitment to achieve goals of gain-sharing program. I've reviewed the bill and I've noted that it has no funding to develop, promote, or administer a gain-sharing program. Given this, implementing the program separate from an achievement award will create that cost or various costs associated, and that will be identified in the fiscal note that we're preparing for you. Again, as proposed, House File 691 is an unfunded mandate. MMB maintains the necessity for the bill to carry funding for resources to support this enterprise program. Madam Chair and members of the committee, I pause for questions and any comments you may have. Thank you.
Mr. Johnson, in your statement, you said that this bill establishes the gain-sharing program, which it does not, because the program was established in 2011. So are you telling me that the department, MMB, has failed to follow through on the law that was passed in 2011?
Madam Chair, I'm suggesting to you that there are all types of gain-sharing programs, and some of them, as I'd indicated in my testimony, are as simple as an employee suggestion program. And our particular program was modeled after some components of a couple of states, so it is a type of a gain-sharing program.
Mr. Johnson, did you establish the gain-sharing program that was drafted in and passed into law in 2011 and signed by Governor Dayton as the language here in section 16A.90?
Madam Chair, MMB did establish a version of that gain-sharing program. Yes, ma'am.
Did you establish the gain-sharing program as defined in 16A.90?
Madam Chair, we believe we did accomplish that. We believe that our program comports with the law.
Well, Mr. Johnson, you just said that you didn't. You did a different version. You said that you've done an improvement award and a achievement award version.
Madam Chair, we did a version of a gain sharing program, and ours, we call it an employee achievement program, but that, such as in other states, is a type of a gain sharing program.
Mr. Johnson, how much have you spent on the achievement awards and continuous achievement improvement awards? Or Mr. Hudson, excuse me.
That's okay. Madam Chair, in fiscal year 14, we spent just under $2,800,000.
And what year was that?
That was fiscal year 14. In fiscal year 16, we spent $2,000,001.
Mr. Hudson, excuse me. I would like to have an itemization of all of those awards that you divvied out, and by agency as well.
Madam Chair, we can provide that for you. Thank you.
Members, also, you will see in this legislation that it asks that they report on the achievement awards and any other performance-based recognition programs for state employees. Questions? I've got Representative Uglum.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Commissioner, some of my questions go back to previous practices and everything else. First of all, I notice there's wide disparities in terms of the total amounts of the awards. For instance, the Department of Human Services received, I hope I'm reading this wrong, $686,500 in bonuses. Is that correct?
Mr. Hudson.
Madam Chair and Representative, thank you for your question. We can go back and provide you a detailed breakout of the payouts. I don't have that in front of me, and at this point, I'm not in a position to say how or why that might vary.
Representative Uglum.
Thank you, Madam Chair. In past practices, when we're paying out all of this money, and I understand, incentives and things are very important, what type of benchmarks did you use to determine the reduced cost of operation or the more efficient services? What were the benchmarks that you used to determine, for instance, the 10% cost savings that you related to the bonuses?
Mr. Hudson.
Madam Chair and Representative, there are a lot of benchmarks out there that's available. We used a lot of states and looked at their program as indicated. A component of their program is what we had implemented. So there are several states out there who have these programs. There's Alabama, Illinois, Indiana. There's quite a few states out there that we referenced. In addition to that, we looked at the private sector to see what they're doing with their gain sharing program. This is a program, again, that is akin to their profit sharing program. And we have some research there, and we know some of those benchmarks as well.
Madam Chair?
Representative Uglum.
Commissioner, could you give me a specific example of how you arrived at, for instance, an individual's bonus of whatever it might be, 10% cost savings? Could you give me a specific example of the benchmarking that you used to arrive at an individual person's bonus?
Mr. Hudson.
Madam Chair and Representative, the Society of Human Resources would suggest that the average benchmarks for a gain sharing program is anywhere from 4 to 8% of one's annual salary. So that is an example of a benchmark that we considered.
Madam Chair?
Representative Uglum.
Okay, I'm not too interested in the percentage, but how did you, for instance, determine the bonus? Okay, so we're saving money. We've come up with some new process and everything else. Number one, for instance, is a direct manager involved? And how do you determine on an equity basis with everyone throughout the department, how do you determine the amount of money that you're giving somebody, and how do you audit those savings to prove that they are correct and the 10% or whatever is appropriate?
Mr. Hudson.
Madam Chair and Representative, again, thank you for your question. We appreciate that. This provision will require us to add a little bit more meat to the bones and build up the program to the extent that we can provide the oversight that we should be providing it. And not only that, so that we can even analyze the payment versus the spending, the savings. At this point, we've not dedicated any resources apart from allowing each agency to make those determinations at this point.
Representative Uglum.
Madam Chair, so what I'm trying to get at, Commissioner, is we're paying out $686,000 in bonuses to Health and Human Services, 610 awards. And how are we internally making those decisions that that amount of money is going to be saved on reduced costs of operations? And how do we audit that? Is it a subjective process where a manager looks at it and says, oh, yes, we're going to save this amount of money, so good, you get 10% of it? How is the process done?
Mr. Hudson.
Madam Chair, Representative, in 2012, we established a policy and we came up with some guidelines and some criterion for all of the awards. And to the extent that they match the policy and the criterion that we established, and we can provide that for you, we were okay with the award going forward. But again, we left that up to the determination, for the most part, to our agencies. But with the revisions that have been proposed, we're proposing to implement a more robust plan so that we can have some sort of analysis, cost-saving analysis associated with these awards.
Representative Uglum.
Madam Chair, thank you. Commissioner, who says no? Who says no that this does not qualify for a bonus? Who says that?
Mr. Hudson.
Madam Chair, Representative, I can speak for our agency at MMB. It is our leadership team. We discuss these awards. We discuss the significance, the weight of these awards, and we make a collective decision as if the award is going to go forward. That's how we handle it at the MMB.
Representative Uglum.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, how many awards have been denied?
Mr. Hudson.
Madam Chair, Representative, I don't know how many awards have been denied. I can provide that information to you, but I can tell you in the last quarter at MMB again, we've denied 3 of them. So I can tell you that.
Representative Uglum.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So 3 out of hundreds. Okay, thank you.
Representative Uglum brought up a good point. In addition to how the awards that you've given out, I want to actually see the documentation of the savings that were achieved in each individual agency as well. And if I don't have that in my bill currently, I think that we should probably make that as a provision as well when we do this later on as well. So I've got Representative Nash.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's uncanny how you steal my questions
I'm
from time to
sorry.
time, but it's okay. I have others. Commissioner, question for you. Did I hear you correctly say that you've done both a Six Sigma and a Kaizen? Are those both programs you have up and running, or you've just sort of modeled some of the work that you're doing after those, or is there a formalized plan that you're using for these lean manufacturing or Kaizen or Six Sigma?
Mr. Hudson.
Madam Chair and Representative Nash, thank you. We have had these Kaizen, different types of quality events. Again, the governor has directed us to maintain our efforts in continuous quality improvement. There's a whole department at admin that oversees this work. I'm pleased that they're here in the audience today. And each agency has a component of that, whereas we're ensuring that inside of our process, we have some sort of continuous improvement component.
Representative Nash.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And so I've been a part of those, and man, it's a lot of work.
Yeah.
It really is. And when I was running a division of sales for a company, had a large P&L, and I had to allocate money for the administration of those programs and for the collateral that we had to buy and for the training sessions that we had to do and all those things. Can you tell us what the cost of administering these Six Sigma programs are? And my question is this specifically: Did you back that out of the savings that were realized? Are you amortizing that over the various departments as a saving, or who's bearing the cost of the training for Six Sigma?
Mr. Hudson.
Madam Chair and Representative Nash, I don't have that information in front of me, but I can do my best to get that to you.
Representative Nash?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Next question, and I wanted to make sure I heard you right. You said when you were giving your testimony that finding operational efficiencies are a part of your everyday work, and I applaud that. And I guess my question is, because when I worked on these, we didn't incentivize our employees to do so. And I'm questioning is, do you feel that the employees would find these efficiencies irrespective of cash reward?
Mr. Hudson?
Madam Chair and Representative Nash, there's a whole body of research out there that would challenge the effectiveness of these programs, many of whom, such as there's a gentleman by the name of Pink, and there's a Harvard Business Review, and then there's a psychological organization out there that have challenged the bonus incentive programs, and some have concluded that any gains in these programs are short-lived. Some have concluded that. But again, the research is mixed. And the research also would suggest that there may not be any difference in terms of the amount of the award. So whether it's $50 or $5,000, there's some research out there that would suggest if a larger amount would encourage one to work harder or to come up with a more ideal. So the research is mixed.
Representative Nash?
Yeah, Madam Chair, thank you. And I guess since you're specifically at MMB, right? If I could, because everybody has one, if you could tell us maybe one of the more exciting innovations or cost efficiencies that you've found, well, let's just say in the last couple of years. I like to hear them because, you know, you do find some good stuff from time to time, and I think that the committee would like to hear some of those efficiencies and, you know, if you've got a cost savings associated with them.
Mr. Hudson?
Madam Chair and Representative Nash, there's a bunch of them that come just flooding my mind right now. I'll mention one, perhaps two, if you like, but both of them are related to sourcing for our state employees to ensure that we have top talent. We had an old recruiting system called Resumex. We transitioned to a system that is now referred to as Recruiting Solutions. And this was a project that I'm so proud of all of the contributions that we had from all the various different types of the agencies, plans, and commissions who gave us feedback at MMB in terms of how effective to use this tool, how to set it up, some of the nuances, some of the defaults. So that was a project that was very valuable and helped us in the implementation of that, and it's an effective tool today. Now we have some system challenges that we need to fix. Some of our systems and software, it's still antiquated, very much outdated, but with what we have, you should be proud of the participation that we had from our agencies who came forward and made this a very good product.
Representative Nash?
And thank you, Madam Chair. And my last question is, so we're going to go back to when I was doing the lean manufacturing stuff. We found a lot of savings. And the great part was that we found a lot of savings and put cash back to the bottom line. The other part was that it was expected of my department to not have that in a budget request moving forward because we found some savings. And I guess my question is, can you show us some examples of a lower budget request by your department and all departments as a result of these savings? Because I'm really curious if that's actually been done, and I'm sure that you probably don't have that with you, but if you would, or maybe you do. But if you don't, we'd really like to get that back to the entire committee.
Mr. Hudson, can you quantify the amount that was saved?
Madam Chair and Representative Nash, I don't have that information here in front of me. There are examples we would be happy to provide you with.
And Madam Chair,
Representative Nash?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. And please, you know, the specific part of the question that I really want answered is, did that lead to a smaller budget request for the next biennium?
Mr. Hudson?
Because if you save the money, then you shouldn't need that much moving forward.
Mr. Hudson?
Madam Chair and Representative, even with the example that I provided there with Recruiting Solutions, that particular expense is one that you won't see anymore because we were able to come together to put out a product that was sufficient within the systems capabilities that we had. Now, barring the systems concerns, you will not see any other requests for expenses regarding the Recruiting Solutions. But I don't have any others available with that detailed information with me today, but we'll be happy to provide that for you.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Representative Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And as a general principle, I do agree with the notion that once the legislature puts in place a program such as this, that the expectation that it be followed makes perfect sense to me, so I don't have a problem by and large with this kind of legislation. A concern or question I would have is fiscal costs to it. Is that with the reports that need to be provided? Is that the concern with fiscal costs, Commissioner?
Mr. Hudson.
Madam Chair and Representative Johnson, there are a lot of costs that's going to be associated with doing something apart from the Employee Achievement Program. There's going to be implementation cost. There's going to be operational cost. There's going to be cost that was previously referenced by the representative, where we're going to have to do some sort of analysis to make sure that we have a good payout expense ratio. So there's going to be all sorts of operational costs associated with this. Plus, we're going to have to market this with our existing employees and have some sort of educational program even for new employees. So there is and will be some cost associated with the program other than the Employee Achievement Program.
Representative Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It doesn't sound prohibitive, but I understand there would be some cost there. One last question on the monthly report. That seems more often perhaps than necessary. I'm not sure how strongly the chair feels about that, but is monthly report, does that seem kind of frequent, or is that reasonable?
Mr. Hudson.
Madam Chair and Representative Johnson, again, thank you for your question. Monthly reporting on this type of a program, we believe we probably could provide you this information, the same information on a quarterly basis at least. But if monthly, if that's what's required of us to do that, we'll do what we can do to get you your information on a monthly basis. Thank you.
Representative Johnson. Representative Vogel.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And question might be first to staff. I'm looking at, on the existing statute, line 1.12, and it says that basically that the cost savings is determined by the commissioner to have resulted in documented cost savings. So as that statute is written, would that imply, it implies to me that before the bonus could be paid out, that it would have to be documented somehow in that it actually had in the past saved money?
Mr. Gehring.
Madam Chair, Representative Vogel, yes, so I'm not quite sure about the tense here. I think the intent is that the commissioner needs to have some sort of demonstrated or some sort of documented actual cost savings to the state before they can make the award. I can see where the grammar is a little bit awkward there about when the savings needs to occur before the award can be made. But I didn't staff this bill when it was first passed, so I'm not sure of the intent.
Representative Vogel.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. So I could probably make the inference then that whether it had to be past tense and have been documented or documented at the time that it was done before it could be paid out, that it probably would have had to been one of those two things to be consistent with the statute.
Mr. Gehring.
Madam Chair, Representative Vogel, yeah, I agree with that.
Representative Vogel.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. So, Mr. Hudson, then, as you prepare these reports, I'm coming up with between $6.8 and $7 million been paid out over 14, 15, and 16. It would also be helpful then to see there should be about nearly $70 million of cost savings. If you could show all of those with that report, that would be helpful, because then it would be consistent with what I'm reading here. So that's a question, if you could provide that.
Mr. Hudson?
Madam Chair and Representative Vogel, thank you again for your question. I don't have that information with me. I'll be happy to go back and try to get that to you.
And Representative Vogel?
Okay, well, thank you, Madam Chair. Well, like I said, it kind of becomes the balance two thing, I think, for the report to be properly presented with, if we paid out, say, close to $7 million, that we document at least $70 million, which $7 million would be 10% of then, so that when the report's prepared, it doesn't have to be maybe redone. Thank you.
Okay. Representative Nash?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I think Representative Johnson just left, but just as a kind of a experiential comment, when we were doing our Six Sigma and Kaizen things, it was regular practice to meet monthly and report back to the collective as to what our findings were. Usually didn't take that very long. It was done over a lunchtime. We would have a working lunch where we would do a Six Sigma report. So from my perspective, having done it in the private sector, it doesn't seem all that difficult to do. Thank you.
Representative O'Driscoll? Oops, he's gone. Representative Ward?
Thank you, Madam Chair. More of a comment. As I'm looking at the original legislation that I understand was authored by Keith Downey in 2011 and 12, I'm looking at this and thinking, this is really casual language. There's really not a lot of structure there that would have given the agency much guidance. And as I'm hearing the discussion, it seems like I'm glad you're doing this because it's going to give them the structure, but I guess I feel like there's some things that we have some questions about. So I'm assuming that as you move forward, there'll be some more conversations about what actually will be helpful and what can be accomplished and what kind of reporting back we want. We've got a long list of things here, so I thank you for doing that because the original legislation sounds very casual.
Well, Representative Ward, I think when you're asking for a project that is determined by the commissioner to have resulted in documented cost savings to the state, and then it prescribes to what amount and how much can be given, to me that sounds pretty prescriptive. And what I'm hearing from the agency is that they haven't done that at all. Instead, they decided to create their own version, which, Mr. Hudson, I'd like to know, by what authority do you have to give any achievement awards and continuous improvement awards? What legislative point to the statute that allows you to do that?
Madam Chair, we believe that the statute that's in front of us today gives us that authority. Plus, we believe there's language in 43A that also gives us that authority. We'll be happy to go back and with this further guidance that you're providing here or proposing the language, we'll be happy to go back and put together a gain-sharing program, perhaps that better meets your expectation. But I am appreciative of the language, at least the proposed language here, that will give us the opportunity to go back and implement something much more than what we have.
Well, and prior to that, Mr. Hudson, we've had several questions about what actual savings have been achieved. So I'm looking forward to that in particular, and each agency's way of handing this out. At one point in some of the information that you've provided, you said achievement awards may be granted for team recognition, project recognition, and individual recognition, and that has nothing to do with cost savings, which is what the statute says. But with that, I've got Representative Quam.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And, looking at this programming and having seen it at different organizations, similar things in the private sector, Malcolm Baldridge, continuous improvement, learned my Six Sigma at Motorola, so I'm familiar with the things that are driving it, and I'm also familiar with the fact that some of these activities are part of the job descriptions of personnel, and so we had people that were exempted from receiving this in the private if part of their job description was to do these activities and save money. Is there any restriction such as that with the current program that's implemented?
Mr. Hudson.
Madam Chair and Representative Ward, thank you for your question. I too have, in the private industry, had some experience in this, and even in my services in the military. In the military, it started with what we call TQM, Total Quality Management, and in the private sector, it transitioned with Malcolm Baldwin's work, and in fact, I had the privilege of winning a team that I supported winning the Malcolm Baldwin Award. So I'm very familiar with what you're asking there. Typically, this does exclude certain individuals from participating, such as senior leadership, supervisors and managers. Our program, currently as it's written, it's pretty open, and it's at the discretion of the commissioner at each individual agency in terms of who participates. We have some ideals if we're required to establish a gain sharing program that is more robust. We have some ideals in terms of who would and would not be included in the program. We believe that all employees are responsible and are obligated to find out cost savings for taxpayers. So this should be a part of everyone's job description to a great extent. Quality improvement. Everyone should have a vested interest in that.
Representative Quam.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If you've got some information to clarify who is exempted from receiving this, and part of the intent in the same time period of the Savvy was that you would incentivize improvements, and then the general fund would actually receive some money back, and the agency or campus would be able to use some of the funds for activities for their mission that maybe weren't descriptive, in the legislature. So is there any delineation between that assessment where it's part of the mission of a group and they achieve savings, and then money goes back to the state? How would you delineate that? Because I understand that there are groups that have had both things. The Department of Administration has had Savvy and the gain sharing.
Deputy Commissioner.
Madam Chair has gone. Mr. Chair, we can provide you that information. As we build this up, we are looking at other programs, and we see that many other states have excluded, for an example, exempt employees. I'm not sure that that's the direction we will go in terms of who will be excluded from the program. Certainly, there are some positions that should be excluded from this program. And as we build this up, again, should we be required to do something more than the achievement program, we will have those exclusions for you, and we can provide that information.
Okay, Representative O'Driscoll.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. And I may have missed this when I stepped out, and I have been trying to do a little bit of research on this, but Mr. Hudson, can you just review for me, and perhaps the committee as well, what methods you use to market, to promote internally this program within the different agencies, or how you get the information down, how it rolls back up into MMB, and who might be tracking that, and putting the encouraging words out to participate in the plans?
Deputy Commissioner.
Mr. Chair, Representative Driscoll, we have a marketing team at our Minnesota Management and Budget, and they do a terrific job with the resources that they have. But clearly, we need to create more laterals. We need to get this out in the hands of every one of our employees, and we need to also create a culture, and that's going to require us to train our supervisors and managers where employees will feel empowered to come up with these thoughts, these ideals, and be a little bit more inquisitive about their work in terms of how they might be able to save the state a little bit more money. So we have a lot more marketing to do around this, and then we have the concern with new employees, because we want to welcome them into a culture where one can be empowered to come up with such ideals and expect to receive a reward for that.
Representative O'Driscoll.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and Mr. Hudson, I appreciate your answer. But if this was enacted into law in 2011, 2012, and we're in 2017, how much longer than the 5 years that we've already had, or 5.5 years, will we need to continue to train supervisors and employees and engage employees and make the newcomers feel welcome to participate in a cost savings and what would amount to be a bonus to them for their due diligence.
Okay. Was there a question? Okay. Mr. Hudson.
Madam Chair and Representative, we at MMB, we've done with the resources that we have, our communication team has done an excellent job communicating this program. We've created a policy in 2012. Every one of our agencies, they're very much familiar with this policy. They know the criterion of the program. But it requires more than getting that out there, and we're hopeful that this legislation will include some funds that will allow us to do what's adequate so that we can promote this and get back the payback that we typically would get in a program such as this.
Representative O'Driscoll.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I believe this will be my last question on the topic. Given the zeal that the testifier has on this, I just have one question. And maybe, Madam Chair, we know this on our end. Have we ever received any budget requests in the 5.5 to 6 years that the plan has been put in place because of the shortfall of funds to be able to properly market and to educate and inform the staff, supervisors, employees, and newly hired employees of the benefits of this program?
Mr. Hudson, have you ever made a request, or Ms. Roberts, do you want to comment to that as well?
Madam Chair and members, I'm not aware of any requests having been made.
Mr. Hudson, has the agency ever come forward with a request for funding for this?
Madam Chair and representatives, I'm not aware of a specific request, but there has been requests for resources for communication and so on and so forth. But beyond that, I would have to get that information to you.
Representative O'Driscoll. Representative Uglum.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Hudson, there's been numerous references to Kaizen and Six Sigma, and maybe for a number of us in the audience, you could explain those programs and how they're functioning at the state.
Mr. Hudson.
Just tell us what they are.
Madam Chair and Representative, thank you for your question. There are different types of quality initiatives, and they take on different looks. For an example, there is one that lends itself more for the manufacturing environment. There's another approach, Kaizen approach, that lends itself better to a process improvement, where you might look at your processes and make better decisions, maybe because you've come up with something, an alternative that perhaps reduces the number of steps. So it really depends upon what you're trying to achieve in terms of what particular initiative or what type of quality program you might implement.
Representative Uglum.
Well, Mr. Hudson, I'm familiar with both programs, but could you tell me the difference between Kaizen and Six Sigma, for example?
Mr. Hudson.
Madam Chair and Representative, I can't give you the textbook definition in terms of what's the difference between those two programs or any other program, such as the Total Quality Management Program. But suffice it to say, it is all in the spirit of making continuous improvement, and that's what we're trying to better our processes and reduce cost and take the rework out of it and stop recreating the wheel. So that's really the objective to some of those programs or some of those tactics or techniques, quality techniques, but give you a definition of each one of those. I'm not prepared to do that today.
Representative Uglum.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, you know, my point is, and I'm sorry to put you on the spot, but my point is, in management circles, everybody gives lip service to these great terms, Kaizen, Six Sigma, total quality management, continuous improvement, and everything else. But the fact is, they're best management practices. If you're a good manager and if you're a good executive, you do this kind of thing every day, and you get paid for it. You get paid for it. So, you know, I find it kind of interesting where not just you, but so many of our departments throw these terms around, but then they can't quantify them. And I'm very disturbed by that. Thank you.
Members, any other questions? Thank you, Mr. Hudson. We look forward to the information that we've requested, and we will share that with the committee as a whole. With that, members, we are adjourned.